Welcome, everyone. Welcome, scholars. Oh, okay. Welcome, scholars. Austin, I think we should start with our program. If you may be able to share with everyone, please. Austin?
Okay, I'm going to share the program for today.
Yes.
Okay.
Our topic for today is thank you, Austin. Our topic for today is global African identity and consciousness and intersectional approach. And I am your host, Irene Maseme from Lesotho. Our moderator is Benjamin Timi. So briefly, I'm a journalist. I'm a professional journalist. I've been a radio host for a year, and I do mainstream journalism. That's what I do. So today, as we start, the time that we're using is the GMT. So I would like to welcome you all. Then our first session will start in 10 minutes from now, after the introductions and after I explain what ARN is. And our first speaker is Dr. Olivia. And then we'll have a recap by our moderator, Benjamin Timi. Then we'll have the second session at 20 minutes to 6. We're using the GMT time. It will take only 20 minutes. So for the second session, we have Stephen as our speaker, and then we'll also have a recap for 5 minutes. Again, the recap will be done by our moderator, Timi, Benjamin. Then after that, it will be the question and answer. I think we have a problem with the third speaker. So if she joins in, she'll be added up, but if not, we're going to have a question and answer session from 5 minutes past 6 until 7 p.m. Then there will be announcements at the end for the last 5 minutes until 7, we'll have announcements and closing. So at the moment, please let me first of all explain to you what ARN is. Austin, please share the slides. I'd like to share what ARN is. Okay, thank you, Austin. So we have ARN, which stands for African Researchers Network. And we also have a website for this. It's www.africanresearchersnetwork.co.uk. That's where you can see everything about ARN, and you can also become a member by registering. So ARN basically is an academic hub that is open to both African and non-African researchers. The membership spans across various academic disciplines and includes PhD researchers and other early career scholars from various universities in Europe, Africa, America, Canada, and many African nations. So you can also register to become, can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, thank you. You can register to become a member of ARN. Just go through the website and then you'll see where to click. Just browse through the website, then you'll be able to become a member. The objectives of ARN is to enhance collaboration and network, to share information on job opportunities and life generally in UK, and also to discuss our publications and ongoing researches to improve our visibility within university, to bring African insights into interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary approaches to research themes and across the globe. We have different activities. For the sake of time, please allow me to skip what activities we have, but as you can see on the slides, you can also simply get all the information from the website. So next slide. We're not there yet, Prof. Austin, you're not there yet. The next slide, it basically shows how the homepage of African Researchers Network, that is where you see, you can also go onto the website to watch previous webinars on our, and also on our YouTube channels. Next slide, please, Austin. Then we also have newsletter, and for the first edition of our newsletter, and volume 1 was in August 2020, and the second edition was, first edition, volume 2 was in September 2020. The topic for the first edition of the newsletter was African Researchers in UK, Surviving the Challenges of Post-COVID Era. And then the second volume, the topic was Pathways Towards Collaborations Between Researchers in and Out of Africa. Next slide, please. You can, as you can see, you can be able to access this newsletter in English, French, and Russian. So about today's event, that is our next slide. Today's event, we are discussing the topic. Today's event, Austin. Please go to the slide. Yes, this one. Thank you. So today we are discussing global African identity and intersectional approach. And here we have 2 speakers, confirmed speakers. We have Dr. Olivia and we have Stephen from Nigeria. Dr. Olivia is originally from Tanzania. And we also have, next slide, please, Austin. Okay, someone is asking to be disabled. I don't know how. Okay, so we have another webinar coming up in May, but before that, we're going to have a webinar in April. But now that we are on this slide, yes, this is the webinar for April, and we are going to discuss Africans, LGBTIQ, and stereotypes. As you can see, we have amazing speakers for next month on the 9th, April. On the 9th, we have amazing speakers, Dr. Jonathan, we have Renee, we have Dr. Anima, we have Shaka. So that's what we are going to discuss. So for next month, please let's go back for April, the upcoming seminar. Yes, after April, we're going to have the seminar on the 21st of May. And the topic for May is going to be, who is an African? Our webinars are also, all the time we host them same time, 5 p.m. GMT. So for May, we have 5 speakers. We have Dr. Tefi from Ethiopia. We have Dr. Benjamin from Nigeria. We have Jos from Democratic Republic of Congo. We have Dr. Lamine from Senegal. And we also have yours truly from Lesotho. That is for May. And then how you can contact us. Please, let's go to the slide of how we can be contacted, Austin. How you can contact them or get hold of ARN. You can follow those links. You can follow us on LinkedIn. We have a Facebook page also, and we have a WhatsApp chat group. We also have a Twitter, and we also have a website as they are outlined there. We have a Twitter page. So next slide, please. That's it with the introductions. That's it with the introductions for this meeting. I think the time allows us now to welcome our first speaker for tonight, Dr. Olivia. I'm trying to, I want to see if I can be able to share Dr. Olivia's.
No, you can just read a profile.
Okay. Let me just read it. Okay. Dr. Olivia did her BSc honors in social work from Royal Holloway University of London and graduated in 2007. She went on to do her MA in sociology from City University in London. She later worked for 3 years as an assistant lecturer in social work at the Institute of Social Work in Tanzania before leaving to pursue a doctorate degree at the University of Bristol, obtaining a Doctor of Social Science degree. Her research focused on the experience of young people of repeating a class in a society where education is given great emphasis as means of social mobility. It looked at the experience of the young people in Tanzania in the context of various systems surrounding them and interacting with them, both directly and indirectly, such as their families, schools, neighborhoods, communities, education, policies, and laws, and how such systems either fostered or hindered these children's resilience. About her work experience, she has worked as an assistant lecturer, as we've mentioned, in social work for 3 years at the Institute of Social Work in Tanzania. This in short, it's called ISW in Tanzania. Between 2010 and 2013, she worked as a program coordinator for a certificate course in community-based work with children and youth. This course was offered as a distance learning program that was run in collaboration between ISW, the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, and the Regional Psychosocial Support Initiatives, that is REPSI. In short, REPSI is actually REPSSI. Then between 2010 and 2011, also she worked on a project to develop training manuals and train trainers on child protection issues, focusing on specific pilot district in Tanzania. This was a collaboration work between ISW and UNICEF Tanzania. ISW, remember we said, it's the Institute of Social Work in Tanzania. Currently, she is following her completion of doctorate degree. She is now taking a break from academia to focus on her social work practice, and presently she is working for a local authority in England in a social work department, focusing on working with children and families. Ladies and gentlemen, please let us welcome our first speaker, Dr. Olivia.
Thank you, Irene. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yeah, as sitting here listening to that profile, it just made me sound so important, and I promise I'm not.
You are important.
But yeah, thank you. I'm mindful. Is it 20 minutes that I have?
Yes.
So yeah, I've been reflecting on this session today, and from the minute I was asked to present, I thought of my approach to this, and I can't claim to be an expert, but I thought I will do more of a reflective kind of presentation or discussion with all of you on what it is and how I've approached this. I'm not sure if Augustine or any of you are able to share what I've just emailed, but I'll just get on to it. So, as Irene said, I'm from Tanzania. This is in East Africa. For those who don't know, Tanzania is neighbors to Kenya, Uganda, Congo. We have quite a few countries around us. I did put a map to just provide you with context, but I don't think that will be shared anytime soon. In Tanzania, it's a big country. We have about 125 tribes, could possibly be more. And obviously, with our first president after independence, Julius Nyerere, he pioneered to have Kiswahili as one common language that unites us all. So at times, belonging to a certain tribe might not make much of a difference because we have one common language. which then brought me to sort of thinking of my identity. And I remember having a conversation with someone thinking, how do I sort of identify myself? And I just thought growing up, I never thought of defining myself based in any particular or specific identity. I was who I was. I was neither Black nor African. I was just Oliver, or I have a middle name, which is a tribal name, Mugizi. So I was either Oliver or Mugizi. And the farthest I differentiated myself from others was through tribes and obviously gender. But again, sometimes a tribe is in passing, or you can sometimes be identified from the tribe you belong to by your surname. And when I do reflect on this, I just think I would have probably focused on my identity based on gender and what I've just said, tribe, and what this meant socially, culturally, politically, and even economically. But again, as a young girl, teenager, I think my identity was just based on my individual characteristics and family and social status that was expected of me, and those kind of expectations that came with that identity. But as a collective, we tended to refer sort of as Tanzanians. Again, you don't think of yourself as Tanzanian, you think of yourself of who you are at that particular time or within the community around you. But even growing up, we had minorities, and those minorities that, although they might have identified themselves as Tanzanians by nationality, but for us, they were different. People like, you would hear in Tanzania a reference to Wazungu as plural, or Mzungu, which means white person. Or we had Indians or Asians, and we would refer to them either Wazungu, Wahindi. That's a label that we would often put to those people that were different. But among ourselves, it was never any different identity putting to ourselves other than, like I said, the tribe. And this also made me think, as I was looking at this topic today, of how those people were referred to as Wazungu or Wahindi, how they would have felt in the context of the collective. And I think the closest I would have come to being different or having a different identity in Tanzania is thinking of the other part. So Tanzania was a union between Tanganyika and Zanzibar. So we had independence in 1961. But in 1964, we united with the island Zanzibar, and that's how we became Tanzania. So if I was to go to Zanzibar, I would immediately be identified as someone from the mainland. Although I speak the same language as in Kiswahili, I would immediately be, and that's because of our accents. And the same is true for the Zanzibarians if they come to the mainland. So that's the only time I would have felt different or needing to identify myself different within my own country. Now, fast forward, coming to now England, that was kind of different. Coming to England, I then have to almost re-examine or revisit my understanding of who I am or what I am. So whereas I never put too much emphasis on identity when I was in Tanzania, being in UK has meant wanting to have my identity either recognized or at least acknowledged. I find how I identified myself in the diaspora, and I'm using the term diaspora here loosely because I know there's a lot of debate of what that means, but I'll just use this as being outside my native country. I find how I identify myself in the diaspora as a form of a response to what I perceive as a threat to my identity. I've gone from being a majority in my own country to becoming a minority with all the challenges this comes with. So my identity in the diaspora, I feel, is socially constructed, but obviously that's with identity anywhere. But I find that in the diaspora, it is defined mostly by the majority. And it's there to reiterate that I'm a minority and I'm different. And I think that often, this is my view, that it serves the purpose to highlight the differences. And I know some authors, feel that identity implies both similarities and differences. And I suppose when considering my identity in the diaspora, I might agree with the implications that, yes, I'm similar to other Africans, but different from non-Africans. So I'm seen as an African first in the diaspora, although I'm from Africa. And this isn't how I would have identified myself before. But because of my perceived threat to my overall African identity, and I use African in inverted commas, I'm happy to be part of the collective identity. And I'd come across an article by an author, and this was a while in 1995, who did an article on the diasporas that moved back to Ghana and what was their sense of identity. And his finding was a lot of them had a strong allegiance to their national identity, and then a sense of belonging to a larger African community. And I thought, actually, that's true. Although I'm Tanzanian, I do strongly feel I don't mind being grouped as African, but I have that strong notion of, no, I'm Tanzanian first, then African second. And again, this is accepting that collective is part of me, I suppose, managing the challenges that come with being who I am in the diaspora. And I think, again, being African and belonging to this identity group implies not only do we come from the same continent, but maybe we possibly share some form of similarities, either in looks, appearances, culture, values, beliefs, whatever it is that makes us Africans. And I find, although this may be the case, I find that the way the Westerns have grouped us, because obviously we are Africans, we accept that, but we are challenging that because of how this is coming across within the countries we live in. I find it, in a way, it is a stereotypical narrow view that dismisses the varied different cultures found in the African continent and everything else that makes and forms our identity. However, I could spend ages talking about that. I won't challenge it as much because I find it offers that sense of being part of a collective, just because it's better to be identified as African than being identified as from your own country because of that loneliness that might come with it. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I can explain it more. And I find that also by accepting this collective, we get to share, we get to showcase, and express ourselves in, through various means. And I find that maybe when I was in Tanzania, I would have taken certain things for granted. I think I was talking to someone about how I might not have necessarily wore traditional clothing in Tanzania because I don't, I didn't think I needed to do that to showcase my identity. Being in the UK, then I feel at times I need to do that, either to remind myself or show people that actually I am this person. And that in a way offers that kind of form of expression within a group. I'm however concerned of the Western label of African identity for the children born in the Western countries. I think for me, what I question is, what is these children's claim to the African identity? Are they not, because they're not born or raised in Africa. So if our African identity is based on our values and all this, so what is their claim to being African, to Africanness? Is it based on what has been passed down to them by their parents? And if so, what identity would they have or assume when in their parents' native countries? since they're likely not to fit the identity narrative of these countries, will then be likely to respond and identify themselves as being Africans, as this is the only identity label they can easily accept by virtue of their appearance and parents' heritage rather than as individuals. So thinking of how I can remove, I can sort of divorce myself from being African and first focus on my identity as Tanzanian, then, embrace the Africanness or the African identity. Where does that leave our children born in Western countries? What history, what experiences have they got to identify themselves with parents' native countries? So are they likely then to accept the collective label just because that's the closest they can get to? Personally, I'm yet to have an understanding or a grounded grasp of what it means to be an African. And I'm glad to see that there will be a webinar about this. And I do wonder if I'm either what it means to be an African, and if what I am, either the African in me or the African seen, is authentic enough. And if this is an identity label that I've grown up with intrinsically or have somehow acquired. And this made me think of an incident where a person who was of African origin accused me at the time of being an African or not behaving, and I remember the word not being Pan-African enough or not being African. And to this date, I don't understand what this meant. And this made me wonder, is identity synonymous with behavior? Because if this person said I didn't behave African or like an African, what does that mean? Does that make me not African then? Was that a temporal thing that I wasn't African at that particular time? And if that's the case, then where does this leave our children born in the diaspora who may not have these African behaviors? If we are going to be identified based on those behavior, whatever these may be, so are they not African, or are they, and I use this word loosely, edited or diluted versions of Africans? So I just leave this out there for you guys to think of. In response to addressing the political, cultural, and social factor that motivates my identity within the diaspora, I find that one's identity is influenced by society, and I don't feel we have our own individual identity. We assume different identities according to where we are or those around us and their expectations. For example, myself, like I said earlier, I am Oliver in certain settings and I am Mugizi in others. I'm both, so my full name is Oliver Mugizi Kishebuka, but I am mostly known as Oliver in a certain settings and as Mugizi in certain settings. And those labels or those names, I feel, come with certain behavior, certain expectations. So obviously, those are like, in a way, identity is fluid. And despite me having my own idea and definition of what I am or who I want to be, I can never be my true self. As this would mean separating myself from everything around me and everything that shaped and continue to shape me. But similarly, while in the diaspora, I'm an African, an identity I have accepted as it offers me a sense of belongingness to a collective. And although this isn't how I would have initially wanted to be identified as, earlier when I talked about the loneliness, this is what I meant as in being African is better because it gives me that collective sense. If you have a collective voice, it's probably likely to be heard than if I had a singular voice as a Tanzanian. So there won't be enough numbers to effect change if I was to stand here as a Tanzanian as opposed to being an African. And again, like I said, we have various versions of identity, who we truly are, which we may not necessarily have a full grasp of or being able to truly sort of be ourselves. But it's also about who we are to others, or according to them and their expectations of us and our social status. And Buckingham notes that because of this, we are never free to choose how we are defined. So I might be here having my own sort of sense of self, and this is what I identify myself with. But I'm not free to choose from how one defines me. And it did make me wonder, is this why sometimes we ascribe to whatever label that is put out there? Because it's already there, so we can't challenge it, or can we challenge it? And while I was thinking of that, something came up in my head, as in when we're in these Western societies, and in my reflection, for me, my clinginess to my own identity as an individual, I sort of relate it to swimming in strong currents. So there you are, swimming and struggling to stay afloat. Then a life life jacket or a paddleboard is sort of thrown at you. So for me, that paddleboard is the African identity. So as I'm struggling to maintain my identity, the one that I grew up with in a society that just doesn't want to understand or acknowledge that, having an African identity is some form of life-saving kind of identity that I can use and just go with it. And just like if you were drowning and you get something to hold on to, you don't question it, you don't refuse it, because it's not like you have a lot of choices. You grab onto it and you just, go with it. And that's how I see what being African is like. It's almost some form of a survival way of keeping some part of my identity that do tally in line with being African. Then it made me also think about the labels that we've been given by the Western, Black African. And I thought, I've never seen white African. So does that mean being African, you have to be Black? And where does that leave the white Africans? Would they then need, when you're filling in forms and you see Black African and all that, and then you see other, will they need to identify as other? And what does this mean? And why does an African need to be Black? And does that also mean being an African is about being born in Africa or being born from African parents? What if your African parents never brought you up within the African cultures, values, or beliefs? What does this make you then? Considering you have everything that could identify you as African, except the core aspects we believe makes one African. Would this make you Black other? And again, going back to the introduction, I'm glad to see that there's a webinar about what does that mean, what does being African mean? Because I would like to know. Another question I found myself asking is, what is the purpose of this label, Black African? Is it because we share culture, or is it because we have the same skin color, or we come from the same continent? And if that's the case, if those are the grounds for this label, why are Asians then not grouped as or identified as people from the same continent? Instead you have country. Again, I can't claim to have all the others, all the answers, I'm sorry. But also, I suppose another thing I wondered is, why do we being referred to? And I did think of this in the context of me as a mother and the conversation I have with my children. Just because we're African, should we accept however we are being described as? Or should we focus on what makes us us? And I know one of the main questions, or one of the main things we were looking at is identity based on I am who I am? I'm not the label or your expectation. But if I am who I am, where does that leave me? Do I live in isolation, or do I live in, what's the word? It's like my behavior, my existence influenced by others, dependent on others. And how then do we deal with this? And I think particularly in the diaspora, with our own children, how do we teach them about identity? How do we approach identity matters? Because we have, as immigrants, we have the advantage of knowing our identity, either from the cultural perspective, values, and all that is so called or considered African, from our upbringing and our history and our experiences. But the children we have here in the diaspora might not have that kind of experience. What is their understanding of their culture, of the African continent? Obviously, we do our own education within the family, explaining our cultural background, explaining our cultural values. But how do they reconcile those when out and about in a society where the education, the curriculum, is something that we don't have any influence on? So I found at the end of the day, worrying more about the actual African identity as a collective, but also of our own individual identity. Because with our children in the diaspora, for them, the African identity becomes, if you remember, the sort of life-saving paddle that they hold on to in strong currents, but may not necessarily have a full grasp of what that means, and may not be able to challenge or even pass that on further. So we end up with, like I said earlier, a diluted or edited version of what it is to be an African, or what, and again, I'm using the word loosely, being an African, but I worry about the identity of our offspring in the diaspora and how society dictates that they accept these labels. Sorry, I could talk for ages, and I think I've just gone a bit over. But over to you, Irene.
Yeah.
Sorry, was I frozen? It's just gone quiet.
No, you're not frozen. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I'm Benjamin.
Hello, Benjamin.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good to listen to you, really, and it's been very interesting. You seem to have really anticipated the discussion so far, and so well. I was introduced to you as the moderator for the program this evening, so here we are. And I really thank you for what you have said to us this evening. And though, permit me a little joke, you have raised all the questions that I would have liked to ask you, actually. Which I suppose that there are questions that other people on the audience would have liked to ask you too. You have raised them as questions too.
Well, I've raised them as questions, and like I said earlier, this has been a reflective kind of thinking. So I'm happy to try and answer any of this, but I would like this to be a further discussion because, like I said, identity is fluid, and sometimes
Yeah.
identity is individual. I think
Yeah.
I was meant to give an example of, I saw a video clip of, I'm not going to say African, I'm just going to say a Black woman saying, although she's Black, she doesn't identify as Black, she doesn't feel Black. She was raised by white parents. And for me, and I think a lot of Black people watching that were thinking, you're mad, you know, that was the response. But actually, how does the person identify themselves? It can be both the person, that's why I say individual versus collective. But you can't necessarily have an individual identity without thinking of the collective self.
Without the
whole collective. Yeah, it is through the collective that you start wanting your own. You want difference.
Okay. Thank you. Just for me to do let me do my job as I'm supposed to do. I make a quick recap of what you have done. Thank you very much for the information about your antecedents as a Tanzanian. I've been to Tanzania before. I understand that little distinction between Zanzibar and Tanganyika and how all the difference it makes. And then you also told us about when you were in Tanzania, you understood yourself better simply by thinking about your tribe and your gender. That is, you are from a particular tribe. You didn't tell us your particular tribe anyway. Is there a particular name you have there among the 125?
I am a Muhaya.
Muhaya, aha.
If you want to say it in English version, you'd say Haya tribe.
Haya, oh wow, Muhaya, okay. So you typically, Dr. Olivia identifies, when she was in Tanzania anyway, simply as Muhaya and gender-wise as a woman. And but she told us that all of that changes now, or changed, when she had to move on to the UK. And that in itself is like some type of watershed moment, I suppose. And the fact of being, having moved from Africa to the UK, she discovers anyway that her identity is no longer just to be constructed, or no longer to be perceived merely as being from some higher tribe and being from a specific gender, but now it is appreciated in a different way, in a reactive or reconstructed way, in which case she perceives herself more as a minority rather than what she felt like where she was coming from before. So like in her expression, she is different, she's minority in the UK. And I think that's in itself is a stuff of the discourse we have this evening. But she also went on to say a number of things which I think we should remind ourselves about. I suppose that questions will come along that line eventually. Something about being, permit me to paraphrase that if, I hope I understood you well correctly there anyway, I hope I represent your idea well correctly there, that in a space that is, for instance, in the UK, she sees herself better amongst other Africans as African in general, and happy to identify with that. But then seems she also thinks there is the importance of considering maybe amongst other Africans, she thinks about her identity first as Tanzanian before being African. I don't know, maybe that raises some tension here and there. Maybe there are issues we have to talk about. But again, I think she's also right to also point about the fact of maybe the incursion in history of the West having been involved in identifying Africans in a narrow form. Maybe as questions come and go, we'll get a little more about that. That's narrowness of the identification of Africans. Perhaps as it borders on differences or Africans as being some homogeneous entity. And then, but the more important thing I also think here is what she had said about the importance of context. Context, specifically regarding herself now, she talks about the identity of, the fluidity of identity, in which case, Dr. Olivia in certain settings is Olivia. In some other settings, she is Mugizi. I hope I've pronounced that name correctly. And that's the stuff of fluid identity there. And these are concerns. How do we manage all of that? Perhaps we may raise a question in terms of how does she identify herself holistically? Does she have to shift performance? Permit me to use that language, performance, but I guess it links up to what she talks about in terms of behavior at some point. And there was a reference to, I think my papers, yeah, I hope my, oh yeah, some reference to identity and behavior here. I do not know how all of that fits into, when she has to be Mugizi at some point, she's Olivia at another point. And if all of that touches again on behavior and identity and the lines, all of the lines that are possible in between. And then the other very important thing I think she has also highlighted is how this discourse touches on children. Of course, she works with children, and there is a concern really about how children can be raised in this specific context in terms of their identity and the troubles that come with what parents, maybe African parents, may teach at home regarding African identity and the stuff of what students or children receive in the schools that they attend in the diaspora. And then she has said a number of things. I suppose that we're able to make a lot of sense from what she has said, but we also suppose that questions are hanging here and there, and we'll welcome them at the appropriate time. And I suppose that the speakers this evening too will interact with themselves, and we'll take the discussions on from there. Thank you very much again, Dr. Olivia Mugizi. I like that name, Mugizi now, Kishebuka. Thank you. We'll come back to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timi. I think and the recap from our brother, and thanks so much, Dr. Olivia. We have the second speaker here, and I think our host takes over from there to introduce Stephen.
Okay. Thank you, Austin. Our second speaker is Stephen Kator. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. He will correct me as he starts speaking. Our second speaker is Stephen Kator. He's a positive psychologist and researcher pioneering research in the field of value for life. His other researches are centered on human well-being or thriving, substance abuse, environmental sustainability, and climate change. Driven by his research experience, he has explored vision research areas that cut across psychology, geography, sociology, and criminology. He has been an active participant and presenter in many conferences and has published sound academic papers in reputable journals across the globe. He has his BSc and MSc in psychology from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Ladies and gentlemen, please let us welcome our second speaker for tonight, second and last speaker for tonight, Stephen Kator. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Irene. I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Oliver, for your very wonderful presentation. I must say that I learned a lot from what you shared, your reflective experiences with identity. And I must also say that there's almost very little for me to say. And when Augustine approached me some time back and said you would speak on global African identity, an intersectional approach, it really took me aback anyway, because all my life I've been a psychologist and I've been used to research in the psychological way. And it was quite interesting to try and begin to navigate areas in the humanities, but it's been an interesting one. And as I began gathering a lot of materials and preparing for this particular presentation, I must say that there's a lot we need to work on as researchers in the field of African studies. And so to present a topic which I am not completely innocent of, and which I have a little bit expertise in, I decided to tweak the topic a little bit. And so if you can see the screen, can you see the screen?
Yes. Yes.
All right, so the topic of my presentation is if there would be global African identity. Sorry, this is blocking this a little bit. An intersectional narrative and preliminary reports of findings from the Niger Spirit in diaspora study. So I'm barely going to 6 months in the UK. And one of the first things I felt was quite interesting to study was the fact that there was a lot of immigration from Africa to the UK and to Canada and the US and other parts of the Western world. And previous statistics have shown, I think as at 2020, a whopping 10,400 students from Nigeria alone had emigrated to the UK for further studies. I think of that 10,400, close to 7,000 were new entrants for the next year. And so there is a gross emigration from Nigeria specifically. And pardon me for trying to narrow the narrative down to Nigeria. I wanted to speak with something I'm very much comfortable with. And so that's that. Move to the next slide. I'm quite having some technical issues trying to share this. All right. So basically for this presentation, so that we don't take too much time, the overview basically is we'll look at a brief introduction, and then we'll look at one of the very core, sorry, is there someone's mic glitching in the background? Then we'll look at the philosophy that guides Africa mentality generally across the world, which is known as Ubuntu. And then we'll try to look at the brief geography of Nigeria. And I'll try to conceptualize what I mean by the Nigerian spirit and reports preliminary findings from the Nigerian Spirit Survey, a study that I'm currently collaborating with some friends to carry out amongst Nigerian students in the UK. And to begin this conversation, I would like to begin with a quote from George R.R. Martins. Many of us may not be very familiar with Martins, but if I call the name Game of Thrones, I'm quite sure that it will ring and resonate a bell. So Martins in 1996 said that never forget what you are, for surely the world will not. Make it your strength, then it can never be weak. It can never be your weakness. Armor yourself in it, and it will never be used to hurt you or to harm you. And I want to, try as much as possible not to be very scientific about the definition of identity. I think Dr. Oliver did that already. And so I will try to use a more narrative perspective to draw some brief definitions from this quote by George R.R. Martin, who is the writer of that very popular movie we all enjoyed, Game of Thrones. So when he said, never forget what you are, in referring to identity, one of the first things that struck me from this assertion was the fact that identity is a state of being, and you be or become something. You know, it says, for surely the world will not. And that also meant to mean that people are aware of what you are. And whether you try to pretend or not, people, you know, all the times are seeing you for who you truly are. And it says, make it your strength, that it can never be your weakness. And that also meant to mean that identity, in this sense, can be your advantage, you know, if you know how to harness it positively, and at the same time, and as well be your weakness and a disadvantage if you can't harness it properly, and armor yourself in it, and it will never be used to hurt you. And so from the context of African identity in the diaspora, as Dr. Oliver also said, apart from racism and apart from the many other ills that are associated with being Black, you see that the identity of a Black person, in most cases, serves to be a disadvantage, serves to be a demerit to him or her. And so you try as much as possible to deny the Blackness, to deny the African in you, and you try to associate and blend in and become like most hosts, the people in the host country. And so, but from what Martin said, you know, looking at that narrative, arm yourself in your identity, and it will never be used to hurt you. In other words, when you are aware of who you are and you accept it, you accept the weaknesses, you accept the flaws, you accept the strengths, you become strong in yourself, and you learn to navigate life by virtue of who you truly are. I want to talk briefly about the concept of Ubuntu, which is generally known across most parts of Africa. For want of time, I removed the slide, which would have, you know, given us a broad perspective of the various terms Ubuntu is referred to as across all tribes of Africa. In Nigeria, we have lots of tribes, the major ones being the Hausa, the Igbo, and the Yoruba, and they all have various conceptualizations of this same term, Ubuntu. In other parts of Africa, you hear them refer to it as Ubuntu. You hear them refer to it as Ubuntu. In places like Uganda, you hear them refer to it as Ubuntu, and all variants, but the basic tenets remain that it serves as a fulcrum around which the African personality and the African identity revolves. I wouldn't want to get us into the theory and the philosophy behind Ubuntu, but just very various, very key, what do I call them now? Key attributes of this identity that makes us truly who we are as African, which I would love us to consider the universal brotherhood which it gives. And it simply means we are one and the same, and I am because you are. That's what Ubuntu generally is known for. Now you notice that this, to a great extent, informs and helps translate the trait in an African to be collectivist. Yeah, Dr. Oliver kept mentioning something about collectivism as against individualism. And so this Ubuntu philosophy, which translates into our identity, becomes responsible for the spirit of brotherhood which we share. Now, when you find yourself with other Africans in diaspora, you discover that there's a common shared sense of oneness that automatically exhibits. And like Dr. Oliver said, at that point in time, it doesn't really matter whether you're Nigerian, it doesn't matter whether you're Tanzanian, whether you're Ghanaian, or wherever you come from, but suddenly you're united by a common sense of color, of skin color. And yeah, it digs down into a trait. And I was researching Ubuntuism some years back to see if it was really a trait that can be psychologically conceptualized and measured. I think I'll go back to that research so that I can speak more authoritatively about that. And so we have other attributes of Ubuntu, which are equality, which are morality, which are dignity, which is sacredness of life, which are respect. There's some which I didn't include in this slide, which are, Augustine, if you can help me admit people because they keep coming in so that I can focus on the slide. Which are resilient, which are thriving. All of this, culminate into the concept and the philosophy of the Ubuntu, which permeates through the fabrics of all African tribes, if you'll permit me to say that. And so having laid the premise about what really makes us African, from my own perspective, I would want us to now move to settle more on Nigeria. You know, I said I'm going to look at the Nigerian spirit. And so here is a very beautiful and colorful slide, which just gives us a very brief overview about Nigeria by geography. Nigeria is surrounded by several other West African countries, by Niger, by Ghana, Cameroon by the other coast, Mali by the other side, and all of that. And you see the flag, you know, it's represented by these colors, green and white. It's made up of 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, you know. And as at this morning, when I was just trying to review this slide again, I discovered that Worldometer, I don't know how they do it, but they update the statistics, the population of every country daily. And so as of today, I don't know how very valid that is, but of course, Worldometer is one of the very trusted statistical sources you can ever have around the globe. And so as of today, Nigerian population was around 214 million, and that's quite huge, you know. So the other pictures there just give us a glance of what the culture looks like. A very beautiful culture. Approximately about 250 ethnic groups, over 525 individual languages, you know, three predominant religions, which is Islam, Christianity, and African traditional religion. And it's quite interesting to know that amongst the lower tribes in the southern part of Nigeria, you discover that Judaism is gradually gaining prominence. So yeah, Judaism is becoming one of the prominent religions in Nigeria, basically because of the Igbo beliefs that they emanated from the Jews. And so by the left, you also see some very wonderful dishes. That's jollof rice, and that's fufu. And I must say that the Nigerian jollof rice is way better than the Ghanaian jollof rice. I don't know if we have Ghanaians here, but yeah, that's just that. And then that's the currency of Nigeria. So this is the basic overview of what Nigeria looks like at a glance. So talking about the Niger Spirit. This is not quite unique to Nigeria alone, and that was why I began laying the premise with Ubuntu, which serves more as a fulcrum around which most African cultures revolve, but because it's been repeatedly, you know, experienced among Nigerians to have this tenacity and to have this capacity to thrive, even in the midst of a very fragile healthcare system and a very poor academic infrastructure, you know, from which they come in their own country with turbulent leadership, the experience, and you know, you would hear Nigerian musicians like Fela, Nicola Kuti sing and say, we're suffering and smiling. And that has become a very popular slang across Nigerians. You say you push a Nigerian to the wall, you know, he will not fight you back. He will, you know, break the wall and then continue moving. So all of that, you know, resonates that there is this spirit of strength, of perseverance, which is, and mind you, which is common amongst all tribes in Africa, but which is mostly, you know, exemplified in Nigerians. And this Nigerian spirit is not just a mere concept like you talk about the American dream or the British dream, but it's more like a feeling, it's more like a drive, you know, it's more like a gut feeling that, you know, makes you feel like you can do anything. But this is yet just mere theoretical assumptions. So to begin a very valid inquiry into this Nigerian spirit, there is the need to conceptualize it as a scientific construct, you know, give it a theoretical framework, you know, a robust validation of the measure, both psychologically and using other forms of psychometrics. And, you know, if it's going to be empirically studied, you know, it will require a definition which is independent of pre-existing related theories or concepts. And so, because this is an ongoing research, some of these things are not readily available, but it's quite interesting to see that people talk about these things at all levels, except that we've not begun to pay attention to it as scientists to see if if these things can be measured and if they could be, correlated with other forms of behaviors, and then we can say for sure that this is the reason why Africans behave the way they do. This is the reason why they do this. That's the reason why they don't do that, and all of that. And so briefly, to give a report of this study, which I was speaking about from the very beginning, it's more of a qualitative study, a pilot study, very preliminary findings, so of course, the procedure was to design the questionnaire, collect data, select participants using a snowball sampling technique. The snowball sampling technique is simply the best in this kind of study because there are lots of participants whom you don't even know, and there's no proper statistics to say these are the number of Nigerians studying in the UK as at this moment. Is there roughly, but you can't lay hold on the whole population sample or the population size at a time. And so you use a snowball sampling technique, which helps you to recruit other participants if you know one person. So for instance, I meet Augustine because I know he's studying in the UK, for instance, and he gives me the contact of one other Nigerian who is also studying in the UK. And we move on like that, and like that. So using this sampling technique, I was able to get like 12 persons. I've not given a lot of demographic characteristics of these people because it's an ongoing study and we're still collecting data. And of course, they were interviewed and of course debriefed. So the study design basically was a hermeneutic phenomenological approach where you get participants to tell you stories of their lived experiences within a particular framework, within a particular phenomena. And in this case, how has been in Nigeria and how has been in African, how is that identity helpful to you to survive? Or how does it help you? Or how is it, how does it work against you as you try to go about your daily life in the UK, for instance? So we got people to answer those questions. And we had quite a number of themes which the study revolved around and which are quite interesting to talk about. But for want of time, I would not speak much about those ones. Probably in a later time, we could delve into them. But one of the overarching themes, which was quite interesting and which is quite related to what we're talking about this evening, is that there was a lot of talk around integrating into the society, and on the basis of integration, people talked about religion, people talked about relationships, people talked about entrepreneurship, thriving, hustling, as we call it, and people talked about family ties. I just put samples of a few responses from respondents here. Dio, for instance. Now these are pseudonyms. They are not the real names of these persons. They're just pseudonyms to help us track their responses and understand if there was a repeated pattern so that we could follow that up. So Dio, for instance, said, well, to be sincere, I'm not as religious as I used to be before. A lot of things are different here and you don't need to pray to get some needs met. Now you understand that the kind of religion we practice in Africa has a different identity altogether from when they come over to the UK or to other parts of the West. And one thing this participant said, which was quite striking, was the fact that a lot of things are different here and you don't need to pray to get some needs met. And then you begin to wonder, what form of religion do we really practice? Is for instance, if it's Christianity, is the God of the Western world different from the God of Africans? Why do you just have social amenities easily accessible to you here in the UK, for instance, and you don't have access to them in Nigeria, and you have to pray and pray and pray? That was quite interesting to me, that to integrate properly into society, some of these people had to drop their original beliefs about what religion should be, their original perceptions about how to pray and how to get things from God, and all of that. And Mecca said, I like their churches. They close very early. And a further question, whether you attend more of the white churches, was followed up by, yes, I attend their churches. And this was also very interesting because, and I also know that I love churches that are very brief, so to say, there is a striking difference from the time spent in churches back in Africa. You know, most of the churches, except for the very old and Orthodox churches like the Catholic Church, most of the churches spend a considerable amount of time. And so when Africans in diaspora begin to experience that, okay, you can really have religion, but with less time, you know, they begin to hang in between. It's a form of cognitive dissonance. And so there's that shaken form of identity. Regarding relationships, one of the participants says, I've been able to make good friends, not just among UK indigenes, but also other foreign students. And there was another thing which was closely related to relationships, which I will not talk about for want of time in this case, but I just want to mention in passing, and which was the impostor syndrome. Many Africans, many Nigerians, to be specific, spoke about experiencing an impostor syndrome within their first few weeks in the UK, for instance. And why that was happening, we can't say, but over the years, over time, for those who reported having stayed more than a year and some 2 or 3 years already, said the imposter syndrome dropped and they were able to mingle and make friends with other people. It's interesting also to say that that particular identity which Africans are known for, which makes them thrive, you know, which makes them survive, being farmers, being business people, it's not left behind when they move from Africa, for instance, to Europe. And Damian said, aside the studies, I will also be running 1 or 2. And that's a very funny slang. To run 1 or 2 means to, you know, get your hands involved in several other things, which can, you know, bring you multiple sources of income. One striking difference which was observed was where they got to family ties. Responders were torn amongst these two. Sorry. Okay, there are some questions coming in. I'll look at that later. Responses were torn against 2 lines, which were quite clear, and I picked 2 different participants to reflect on their responses here. James said, you know, I asked a question and he laughed and he says, in Pidgin, I define green card. You know, if I succeed and marry, that's probably get married to a white lady. Nothing is taking me back to Nigeria again. And whereas Chizoba said, I have a family back home and I'm working on bringing them over here. So when it came to family ties, you observe that some people, some persons were willing to do anything possible to break those ties with Nigeria and start life all over again, while some had those ties, you know, strong, and you know they kept looking forward to the possibility of even bringing family over to the UK. That might be explored further because James was male. The pseudonyms were used based on gender, and Chizoba was female. Now, because this is not a very quantitative study, it might be impossible at this stage to say if this perception and this perspective varies across gender, but at least it is something worth looking forward to in a future research, which might explore similar constructs. And I think that is all that I have got for us. I'm not quite sure where I ended the slide here. Yeah, so we had other themes like racism and the imposter syndrome, which I spoke about. And of course, because this is still an ongoing research, I couldn't, you know, speak about all of that at this moment. And I think I want to say thank you so much for listening. With that, I've come to the end of this very short and brief presentation. Thank you, Augustine.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Benjamin, over to you with the recap.
So, thank you, Stephen, for your discussions with us this evening. And you titled you made a personal title of your work to read Intersectional Narrative and Preliminary Reports of Findings from the Niger Spirit in Diaspora Study. I like to paraphrase the Niger Spirit as never say die. The never say die spirits of Nigeria. From what you have said, you You have identified it as such, really, as the spirit of never say die. There is always something to struggle for, to work for. And then, yeah, thank you for your work. And you also took us to the cinema, anyway, to see the Game of Thrones one more time. And then I was particularly keen on your drawing out that citation from Judge R.R. Martins. Never forget what you have, make it your strength, and then it goes on and on. And I think that touches very importantly on the stuff of identity, personal identity, to be more precise. Okay, thank you. And then you also went on to you touched on the Ubuntu spirit as a foundational theory or a means of relating to some form of African relational system or African relational belief, by which the dignity of individuals can be recognized. And then you went on. And all around this, I suppose that there will be questions touching here and there, which other participants would be able to raise. Maybe myself too, I have one or two questions as moderator. And then, of course, we are thankful, or we recognize the fact, like you noted it, that your work is in progress. So most things are still at some level of foundational research, ongoing research. But then I think that you also drew our attention to very important issues regarding how people actually integrate. That is the question of integration, the challenge of integration, which in a diaspora space, which is very important for this type of discussion. And then some other means of maybe, if you like, integrating, so to say, by which you might refer to some of the issues you brought about, issues touching on religiosity or religiousness or religious experience, as we may like to coin them. And sometimes how some of this relates to the challenge of the African experience of the deficit in infrastructures. We're specifically talking about, people knowing that what you can get in form of infrastructure, you don't have to necessarily go and pray about in church. And some of these things that you talked about. And then imposter syndrome, people wanting, you may need to expatiate a little more on that for us. And then you talked about something also very important, again, family ties, the concerns about family ties, sometimes bordering on the motivation to maintain connection with the homesteads, maybe from Nigeria or from Kenya, wherever one might have come from, or sometimes one being ready to disconnect from the homestead in a sense and just latch onto the green card, as the case may be. So we thank you for talking about these things, and I suppose that as the questions and answers will come into us here, we have a better understanding of that that behavioral part of the whole thing. You can explain to us more from the point of view of being a psychologist and all of that. So thank you so far.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you, Benjamin, for the recap. Ladies and gentlemen, I can see your hand, Brother Shabazz. And at first, I think we had Barata. Barata William, he had his hand up during Dr. Olivia's presentation. Maybe I should start with Barata. Barata, are you still on the line?
Okay. Oh,
Austin,
excuse me,
please?
excuse me, Irene.
Yes.
Now, you're picking on the questions for Dr. Olivia now?
Yeah, I think we should start the question and answer. The question and answer session.
And you want us to start with Dr. Olivia, right?
In any way, I'll just look at the hands. If someone has a
Okay.
question for Dr. Olivia, we'll note it down and give Dr. Olivia a chance to answer. Then if someone still at the same time has a question for Stephen, they can ask and we give Stephen a chance to answer.
Okay. Fine.
How would that? I think that would work better.
Yeah, it's fine. It's excellent. I just wanted to know the way we are going.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can take questions alternatively. Lisby, I also see your hand. So who will start? Who's willing to start?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Should I go or?
Yeah, you can go ahead first.
Okay, yeah, I really appreciate it. My name is I'm Kwame Shabazz. I'm an anthropologist by training. I'm African American, and I do research in West Africa primarily, looking at sort of what connects African Americans and Haitians and Jamaicans and Nigerians and Kenyans, etc. So basically Pan-African project. So you guys generated lots of interesting questions. I just wanted to run through a few ideas I had. First, I have to correct the brother Stephen about jollof rice.
I knew there was going to be somebody.
Yeah, I have to comment on that misinformation. You know, the best jollof rice comes from Senegal because that's where it originates. If you've ever had, jollof is for the Jollof kingdom of the Wolof people.
The Wolof people.
Right, and so it's a Pan-African dish that Nigerians have claimed as their own.
Oh.
But once you try the Senegalese version, you'll never go back.
Okay.
I promise you.
It's good to know.
Yeah. Some more serious business. Let's see. First of all, so to our sister, I just wanted to note that sociologists on identification or identity, they say that it's sort of a complicated dance between how you identify as yourself and then how society identifies you. So she was spot on. She was spot on.
We can't really hear you because somebody's mic's on. Sorry.
Yeah. Did you guys get that? So I was saying sociology. In terms of identity, it's a complicated dance between the self and then how society identifies you. And so our sister was spot on in how she, I think, laid that out. Now for the Khan of Ghana, where I've done, I spent a lot of time in Ghana, they have lots of interesting ideas about identity. I'll just mention one. That is to say that the Mogya, they call something the blood or the Mogya is inherited from your mother. And then what's called the Sum or spirit is inherited from your father. And these are sort of spiritual essence that collectively defines or shapes who you are as a person. Now, there's also the idea that's quite common, I think, throughout Africa, that your identity is in part, or a key part of it is that you carry your ancestors with you, that their ancestors are part of your essence. And so as an African American, we carry, or even a Haitian or a Jamaican, all those folks who were enslaved during the transatlantic slave trade, we carried our ancestors with us across the Atlantic in our persons. And they continue to define and shape who we are as people of the diaspora who were enslaved in the New World, right? Now, it's also true that East Africans, that they were enslaved, a small number were enslaved in the Americas, but they were primarily taken across the Indian Ocean and enslaved in places like India and in the Middle East. Now, my own experience with all this is that a few examples in Ghana, I'll tell them I'm from, the United States, or I'm from Los Angeles, and oftentimes they'll insist and say, well, where are you really from? Where are you really from, right? And the implication being that, okay, that's part of who you are, but where in Africa are you from? Now, part of it is not really having a good grasp of the slave trade, but also that I think too, is there's something, but you're still African despite the fact that you've been separated from us for a long time.
Mm.
So there's that, at least for me. Now that varies quite a lot. You know, some African Americans travel to Africa, to Nigeria or Ghana or wherever, and feel totally alienated. Others like me feel, you know, totally at home. So it varies quite a lot. And then I'll also mention, along the lines of what Olivia was talking about, it's true that our identities were imposed to some degree. The idea of an African is an imposed thing. Even the borders that we claim now were imposed in the Berlin Conference, 1884, 1885. But it wasn't just the imposition, right? It was also that white people, Europeans, had to police how we use those identities, right? So yes, Africa was imposed, but Africans used that identity in subversive ways, i.e., as a way of unifying against a common oppressor. And so I think it's important to note that yes, it was imposed, but there's also some sort of resistance and subversiveness in those things that were imposed. It's not just a simple matter of somebody forcing something on you, and over time you've accepted that thing. And then lastly, I'll just mention that that in a personal experience in Los Angeles, I was in a Nigerian restaurant, and I met someone in the restaurant who turned out to be the chef or the cook. And for some reason, I said something to that cook in Kiswahili. And it turns out that the cook or the chef in the Nigerian restaurant was Tanzanian. And she was overjoyed that I spoke a few Tanzanian words because, you know, in the US, we celebrate Kwanzaa. And so we've learned a few basic Kiswahili words. And so she was very impressed and happy to hear Kiswahili in a place where she wasn't expecting to hear it. And those few words connected us in ways that perhaps we would not have been connected otherwise. And so language plays an important part in how we connect to each other as African people. And so I think it's great. I think it's a great step forward that the African Union has adopted, you know, Kiswahili as an official language. And so we're gradually developing Kiswahili as a Pan-African language of communication across the continent. So that's wonderful. One more story too. I was in Ghana for the burial of Fatia Nkrumah, who's Kwame Nkrumah's wife, and she's an Egyptian Coptic, right? And but if you look at her, she looks white. And when I was at the funeral, I took a few Ghanaians to the memorial service where she's no, actually it was where she was actually. This was later after she was buried there. And they had an image of her across her tomb, and the Ghanaian looked at me and said, why did Nkrumah marry a white? And then I had to explain to him that, well, actually, she's an African, she's Egyptian, but she's also an African woman. But oftentimes the discourse or conversation around this issue of Black African is about how Arabs oftentimes see themselves as separate from African people or see themselves as superior to African people. So you have North Africa that's dominated by Arabs, and Africa south of the Sahara, that is quote unquote Black. And so the Black Africa, at least one part of the story, the Black Africa comes from that division between North Africa, which is dominated by Arabs, and then Africa south of the Sahara, which has been called Black Africa. And I've heard many Africans in Ghana. I've been about eight West African countries, and I've heard this many times, where they use the term Black Africa to distinguish themselves from, you know, those Arabs in North Africa who think they're superior to us. And so that's one. There are other sources too, but that's one major source of the Black African terminology. And I'll end it there. Thanks.
Okay. Brother Shabazz, who might you want to react to what you have said so far now between
Well, actually, if I could, so alongside that last question, if I could just ask Olivia about the Arab part of it. So I know that in East Africa too, there's a sense of, there are some Africans who are dark as me or darker who identify as Arab. And so if she could speak on that part of the Tanzanian identity mix, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, Olivia, please. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm so sorry. Not just Arabs. We also have Indians, and I hate using the word Indians because it's sort of discriminatory. But yes, we do have Arabs, and I think do you remember when I said how growing up would refer to the people different to us with, their race? And I feel that in terms of their reference and in terms of how they feel more superior than the others, and this is my personal experience and what I can think of, it's more of the Indians that will have tended to have that attitude than the Arabs. You have between the two groups, there is more intermarriages between the Arabs and the Black Tanzanians than the Indians and Black Tanzanians. And also, again, this also when you go to Zanzibar, a lot of them, because with the Arabs, they settled mostly or mainly in Zanzibar. So there are areas where you're likely to find more Arabs or people of Arab origin than other parts of Tanzania. And I've really never thought of it the way you've put it across, Brother Shabazz. But I think my experience has been more so with the Indians Tanzanian than the Arab Tanzanians.
Excuse me. Let me a little bit exercise some power here as moderator to quickly throw in my own specific questions to both speakers, so they will answer as it touches them. To Olivia at first, I needed her to react to something that caught my attention when she was speaking, and that is when she talked about some moments, this whole thing about fluidity of identity and all of that. And then in some moments, it is fine in the diaspora to think of yourself as African. But at some point too, even within that diaspora, do you think maybe amongst other Africans that you emphasize your Tanzanianness, so to say, first before being African with others? I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say there.
So
okay,
I can see. Sorry.
Should I add the second question immediately?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. The other question would be something very important to this evening discussion, and that is the question of identity and epistemologies. You hinted it in a very important way. It was very crucial when you talked about identity and children, because I think that it's important to factor in children when we talk about developing a consciousness about being African, or there's another big issue about being Black or whatever. That's another thing there. But now let's just look at this whole thing about trying to develop consciousness in our children, or trying to help our children to shape their own identities, and also talking about if we want to imagine an African, or so to say, a resuscitation of African epistemologies, or African ways of doing things, African way of being, and all of that. How do you think we can do this? How can we achieve this, especially with children? How can we specifically promote our values as Africans, or whatever thing is important for us to promote as Africans, even given the fact that our children are also exposed to diaspora and methods of being, so to say? You hinted some discussions around that earlier. The other question for Dr. Stephen, I would say to him, let me not cause some confusion here. Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Olivia, sorry, just for a minute. I am realizing your hands, ladies and gentlemen, and after Dr. Olivia responds to Benjamin's questions, please, it will be your turn. Then we'll have Mukile. Mukile has had her hand up also, or his hand up for a while. Then after Mukile, I'll take Austin's question. So I'll take them, the three of you, consecutively, so that our speakers can respond to the questions thereafter. And
okay.
May we please try to make them as brief as possible? Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Olivia.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of my African identity, and I'm glad I can see Liz from Kenya here. I tend to emphasize my Tanzanian identity when I'm among East Africans, or if I'm around people that tend to identify the accent. So often people will say, oh, are you from Kenya? Because of my accent. And I tend to be a bit standoffish because I'm thinking, no, I'm Tanzanian. So when I'm with the people from East Africa, I really bang on about being Tanzanian. And because we speak Kiswahili, I also bang on about how our Kiswahili is the model language and not Kenyan or Congolese. I know Brother Mukile is here. So that's the one bit. Coming to our children, it's funny, I was having a conversation with my daughter, and it's something I've been thinking of, and thinking of Dr. Stephen's presentation, where someone said when we come here, our identity is transformed. So I've been thinking about this and how we have to incorporate where we are and what we want our children to be. And it's important for them to understand the background, where we come from, if possible, the kind of cultural values, expectations, and all this. But I found that this is just me from my personal experience, that it's the values that we believe in. Because remember, although there is me, there is also us. And I need to be able to know who is me, what do I stand for, what do I believe in, before I can then identify with us and with the collective. So them knowing the basics and also the importance, and like I said, with them being diluted Africans, I want them to understand what it is that I think makes us African. What are the important values of being Africans? And at the same time, what's the importance of them not losing who they are and the aspect of being Tanzanian? So it's almost having that kind of hybrid approach, particularly if we are going to be sticking to what labels that are put out there. And because I don't want us to stick to those labels, what I sort of tell mine is that might be what people are saying you are, what people are expecting you to be, but this is who you are meant to be, or this is who you are and what you believe in. So no matter what others think of you, this is who you are. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes. Okay, thank you. Irene, you want to go ahead to ask the questions from Mukile, and there are some other questions somewhere there too.
Oh, okay, thank you. We'll have Lisby, then Mukile, then Augustine. Lisby?
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So, my question was, yeah, in relation to what Olivia said, Oliver said about how, I mean, like, is it the color of our skin that makes us who we are? So like you mentioned, like, you know, there's some white Africans. So like I was born in Kenya, and I actually knew like a few Kenyans who were white, who were born in Kenya. Their parents had come over, but then they were born in Kenya. So yeah, they then, you know, their identity, they thought they were Kenyan. But some people were like, no, you're not Kenyan. And I was like, actually, I can see how they would think that. Like, you know, they spoke Swahili way more than I did. They talked to a lot more. Actually, they talked to a lot more Kenyans than I did. And it was just interesting that did come to my mind when you mentioned that. And also I went to an international school, so I knew a lot of Indians. I also don't like saying that, but I had some Indian friends, you know, and they also spoke Swahili way better than I did. But maybe I'm seeing identity as what you speak than like how you look. So is that the right way to look at identity, or is, like you said, like identity is fluid, and also there's different ways of looking at identity?
I think it goes back to how we say that, like what I said earlier, that you can't control what others define, how others define you, and this is where the problem is, because it's like when we talk of African, why is it that we are immediately thinking of Black Africans? Why are the white people not Africans or not considered as African? Is African a language? And I remember when I was approached to come to this, I remember having a conversation with Augustine saying, what is African then? Is it, you know, why, if Africa is about being born in Africa and brought up in Africa, how come we grow up next to our neighbors who are either Indians, Arabs, or whites, and yet we don't consider them as Africans despite having been there 3 generations? At the same time, I questioned about how, for example, I don't know about Kenya, but the Indians in Tanzania, you find maybe they're like 6th generation, yet those children speak fluent Punjabi or whatever, yet we don't see them as African. So, and this is why, having had to examine and sort of reflect, I'm thinking, actually, what is identity? I can identify as this, but then others might have a different version of what I am. And if that's the majority, then that goes. And this is, then it makes you a minority, because what you identify as might not fit in with the narrative of the majority. And hence you end up having to, like I said, my sort of pictorial thinking is, you are in the water and you're like really struggling to come up, and you hold on to whatever that you get. And that's how I find that the minority's identity ends up being like that.
Okay.
Okay, Lisby, over to you, Benjamin.
You know, the thing gets more and more important, more and more interesting, really, and then we'll never really leave this spot if we don't try to advance further by some means, really. Those questions are very, very important, and I think it borders a lot on what some theorists, particularly maybe Charles Taylor, for instance, likes to talk about the distinction between recognition and misrecognition. And sometimes we need to try to find the line in between that, really. How you recognize yourself when you are misrecognized, and your relationship with, because at the end of the day, our identity is always shaped by our relationship with the other person. We are, you know, people are called Indians or Yoruba or Kosa or whatever group you have there, more because of some relationship that we have with one another. And I think it's difficult to continue on and on around that. We have so many questions here anyway, but there's a quick question for, I throw in my question, then I allow other questions to come in also. This time around for Dr. Stephen, and then where is it? We thank Brother Shabazz for the point about the Jollof rice and the Wolof people of Senegal and all of that. That's, I think if Nigerians and Ghanaians know that, maybe they should bicker a little less about Jollof rice. I'm Nigerian myself anyway, but I love Jollof rice. I don't care who makes it well, just do it well anyway. But anyway, my very quick question for Dr. Stephen touches on the whole thing about Ubuntu, which I think is very, very important this evening now, as a grounding force, a means of negotiating our inter-relational being, so to say, with each other. Ubuntu as a concept of relational African unity is beautiful, you know, recognizing my dignity in your dignity, recognizing your dignity in my dignity. But we have also seen also within Africa, in African spaces, and Africa beyond African spaces, that is in the diaspora, we have seen from time to time how Africans themselves do not live up to Ubuntu. And that becomes a real challenge. It makes us question whether Ubuntu is just some ideal up there that we are unable to live up to. So we see Africans mistreating each other. And then sometimes even Africans not wanting to relate with the other in diaspora and spaces. And that is important for us to look at, really. And then I think I had something else. I hope I get to see it very quickly because I have so many things written down here.
Okay,
If
Benjamin.
I can't find that, let us take other questions for now.
Yes, I was just about to cut you right there.
Yes.
Mukile, may we please take your question? Mukile?
Yes, thank you very much, Irene. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'll put my video on so I can see. Yes, okay. Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to ask a question to all panelists. It's about, I'm referring to what Dr. Oliver said, that identity is fluid. I want to give an example of myself. I was born at the time, I use names as a mark of identity. I was born in a time in Congo where the dictator, then Mobutu, made a new law whereby any child should only have Congolese name, no European names. I was born at that time, and that's why that's the reason why my first name is Mukile. But my parents always called me by European names. My European name is Junior. They always call me European, even though in the book when I register they have to write African names because it was the law. But they still call me European names. So I'm giving that to ask the question to the panelists that is it not time we should embrace our hybridity? Because we cannot force people to, instead of dividing ourselves between more African, less Africans, you know, we can recognize we cannot turn back the time. You know, we've been colonized. We should shared some culture with you know, ex-colonizers, and even now in Congo, people call them the European names. Most people in Congo. So and so that's my question basically. Should we now just embrace it and see as a strength? Because Dr. Oliver mentioned that, and I can relate to that when she said that in some places she called herself Oliver, in some places she Mugizi. I do the same. I can go there, they call me Mukile, I go there, they call me Junior. So I can navigate different places, and I see it as a strength, and it doesn't make me personally less African, because I still eat fufu, I eat sombamaki, I eat you know, I'm still African. So I want to ask that question: should we not just embrace it instead of dividing ourselves between more or less Africans? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Stephen, we'll start with you. You respond to Benjamin's question, and then it will be over to you, Dr. Oliver. Stephen?
Okay. Thank you, Irene. Thank you. Before I respond to that question, I spotted my mentor here. He joined the Zoom meeting. Oh, he's still here, Dr. John Bosco Chukoji. I love to recognize him everywhere because he is my mentor. Thank you, sir, for joining. All right, so regarding what Benjamin said about Ubuntu, yeah, it's true, and I agree with you, because just like every other phenomena, I would want to borrow the term fluidity to refer to Ubuntu. It exists, it's there, it's ideal, and it's actually supposed to, you know, be the framework around which everything we do as African revolves. Because if you compare history across the ages, you'll see the cohesion with which Africa operated just before the colonization era and all of that. And so last year, I began doing a research work where I was trying to, you know, conceptualize Ubuntuism as a trait and see if it's possible to measure it. I was working with that side by side with value for life, because there are lots of wars going on in Africa at the moment, a lot of intolerance across all lines, religious lines, political lines, you know, and it didn't used to be so, actually. And so what's happened to Africa? What's happened to the brotherhood that we once shared, that is making us become so vicious and violent against one another? And one of the hypotheses I was proposing was the fact that this Ubuntu trait, which we had, which our parents, which our forefathers and ancestors had, is no more there. It's waning, and due to the effects of globalization, and due to the fact that the other cultures are eroding on us, which of course we can't completely fight, but if eventually the findings show that Ubuntu can be conceptualized as a trait, and just like you say, this person is high on extraversion, for instance, or low on conscientiousness, this person is neurotic, you can identify individuals who are high on Ubuntuism. Then we can create intervention and strategies how to teach and re-culture and acculturate once more this Ubuntu trait in Africa. And so it's true. You see people cheat each other. You see people, make gains, unnecessary gains from each other, and they're Africans. And yeah, but that doesn't mean the trait is not there. It's there, and I want to propose and theorize that it is responsible for the cohesion which we once shared. And if only we can get the missing fabric, we can build this Africa as it used to be before all of these things happened. I don't know if I answered your question, Benjamin.
That's a very interesting perspective to it, but I think it's a discussion that never finishes, because even thinking about colonization and the slave trade and all these things, we would almost wonder really whether there was a time that Ubuntu was fully operational. Maybe it was there as an ideal, but not fully operational, in the sense that, if we thought about the dignity of each other and how it was so important to us as Africans, then perhaps maybe the slave trade would not have happened in the first place. But anyway, we cannot talk about all of these things tonight. It's just, these are musings. These are all things we can consider as we progress with our work. Finalized hand is up.
I think I'll have to be very strict from now on. We haven't taken Austin's question, but before we do go over to you, Austin, Dr. Oliver, please respond to Mukile's question. Then it will be over to you, Augustine. Dr. Oliver?
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. Mukile, I do agree with you. It is time to sort of incorporate and accept the hybrid identity. More so, I feel this for mostly our children, the children growing up in the diaspora. The reason I'm saying more so, do you remember when we talked about the fluidity, and sometimes you adapting a hybrid kind of identity, when you go back to your native country, that might not sit well with those around you, particularly you left home as an adult or someone, old enough to understand. Whereas with our children, that's different, because one, we raise them behind closed doors as who we are in our native, from our native background. Then outside we have the African identity, and that's for them, that's the hybrid they'll need, because just like the conversation going in the chat groups about Indians, Arabs, and all that in our native countries, these children, when they go to our home countries, if, for example, mine were to speak Kiswahili, it will be Kiswahili with a heavy Mzungu, white accent, playing with others, like the kind of things we took for granted, that is part of being who we are, is different from them. So they are more that will have that kind of hybrid identity than we would. And this is why I kept insisting that we then need to build on what values, build on their individual identity, because as it is, we are able to call individual versus collective, because we know what our individual identity is from our experience growing back in Africa. Whereas them being brought up here, they have that collective identity being shoved down their throats. So we then need to focus on building the individual behind closed doors and encourage them to have that hybrid.
Okay, thank you. Augustine, and then Lisby, please let me take your questions consecutively. Augustine, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My question goes to the very interesting presentation given by our brother, Stephen. And in his research, he made mention of some variables that he used, like religion, relationship, and family network, to check those who consider themselves or Africans who are in the diaspora, and the transformation that has occurred to them, and which makes them un-African. Like, if you're in Africa, going to church or mosque or being religious is something that you feel you have to do automatically. But you see people doing that, coming to the diaspora, they change and they stop participating in all those things they used to. The same thing with relationship. When we talk about family, extended family and the network, longer, and then people just transform. And there's all this idea about un-African. Even those in the continents are always talking about once you people cross over to the diaspora and there's this kind of transformation, and they call it un-African. So I'm just trying to ask, what makes someone un-African? Because, you see Mukile talking about what we call it hybrid. And for me, that's un-African. If you're talking about hybrid, you want to dilute the originality of values, cultures, and attitudes that are known to Africans. And whether you're a Tanzanian or a Kenyan or Congolese, we just see that thing coming up. But sometimes there is a kind of deliberate effort. So I just wanted to share, maybe the two speakers can help us to see what makes you an African and how do we conceptualize redeeming this, your Africanness that the diaspora seems to be challenging or the environment seems to be altering. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Austin. Before they answer, Lisby?
Yes, I have a question for Stephen as well, about you mentioning the imposter syndrome. I'm not sure exactly what that is. I've heard it, but I'm not sure what it is. So if you could explain, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Olivia, would you like to start with Augustine's question?
Yes, I've just also responded because the same observation is what is in the chat group. So when we talk of hybrid, we are not to lose, I am not implying losing our African identity. The hybrid aspect of it is we are here in the diaspora. We are dealing with collective identity at the same time holding on to our native identities. And by saying hybrid, it's actually accepting that as Africans, and again, going back to what you've said, Augustine, is what is African? What is the expectations of being African? Is it, and then what is it that makes me Tanzanian? Why do I identify as Tanzanian? So the hybrid aspect actually, in a way, it's enriching for our children. Because whereas I grew up in Tanzania, my focus was me, Tanzanian. The rest of Africa was just me learning in history or seeing in the news or reading, whereas as an with African identity, what we are giving our children is that opportunity to accept different version of African identity. I came here before coming to UK. Did I know about Jollof? Did I know about Pidgin English? Now I do. When I'm among Nigerians, I also try to sound like Nigerian with my English and Pidgin English. That's, at that particular time, I am incorporating whatever is around me. And that's what I think, my understanding, I don't know if that's what Mukile meant. It doesn't mean we are losing what is ours. We are still us. In actual fact, this is us accepting Mother Africa and just accepting, whereas initially I might not have been in agreement of just being African, I was just purely Tanzanian. Actually, it's more enriching being African and then focus on being Tanzanian when I'm in Tanzania, unless my Tanzanianhood is under threat within the African context.
Okay, thank you. Stephen? You may take over to respond to Lisby's question. Stephen, are you still online? Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
All right. Okay. So talking about imposter syndrome, just simply put, is that inner doubt you have when you're with people of other climes in the context of culture, for instance, you feel like, oh, I don't even deserve to be here in the UK, for instance. Am I worth it? Can I say something? Will they look at me as African? And because of that, I'm not good enough to say something. Just that feeling, simply put. And just to talk about the hybrid argument and all of that, we won't come to a conclusion if we go into it deeply. But the truth, what I perceive is we are losing this African authenticity the more we accommodate that term hybrid. The term, the word in itself, hybrid, means a mixture of what is original and something else. And so there's no, and you've corrected yourself, you said it's not static. Culture is not static, quite all right. And that's the more reason why we shouldn't accept hybrid, because in its sense, it's not static, so it's already changing. So if you bring in more changes to it, then you help it to elude faster. And saying the fact that we have been disadvantaged over the years by the forceful, I want to use the word forceful invasion of African cultures, we have to, unite and fight strongly to at least have something authentic. Let's try and develop something which is ingenious to Africa without bringing in all of this external hybrid. Like I see Mukile doesn't want to agree with his special expressions, but yeah, that's it. Let me not take more time. Thank you, Irene.
You're most welcome. I don't know if there's anything someone needs to raise. I'll just add 5 minutes or on the time that we already have, because this discussion, we can have it throughout the night or throughout the day for those who are still during the day. For some of us, it's quite late. Anyone wants to say anything to our speakers? Stephen, Dr. Oliver? Nothing. Going once, twice?
Nothing from me.
Augustine has something? Okay, over to you, Augustine.
Yeah, I just want to thank our speakers for taking the lead in this conversation, the conversation that will involve many other countries. And it's challenging to go first, knowing that other people are still going to have a conversation on the same question and topic that you are addressing. And we're very happy because I've learned a lot today. And as the host and the moderator has explained to you, that the conversation continues. In May, we're going to have a full house of almost 7 speakers from various parts of Africa. And you have given us something very good to look at, which is the first of all, this hybrid theory. And it's interesting that Dr. Oliver once agree with the idea of hybridity, and the Stephen is not agreeing with that. So we can look at this question of Africanness and the originality of being an African. I know Dr. Oliver, and I know that she's practicing the hybridity. The same thing with Mukile, and we have had the argument, but sometimes I think about it, because this wasn't the way I used to speak when I got to the UK. But I've been forced to be speaking like this because I have to speak like this, or else I won't even get a job. So I have to learn to speak like a British person, because if I go, but when people see me speaking like this, they will say, oh, but if I'm not conscious of that, I quickly swap and so thank you very much. I appreciate what we are doing. So I turn to my originalness, but my original Africanness, what's going to transform me to in the diaspora? And but the question is this: that does this continuous trying to fit in and trying to be hybrid, how that shapes you after 4, 5, 10 years, and when you return to the space, to the African space, everything they are doing, or you become an alien completely because it's irritating you, whatever they are doing, because you haven't transformed. And then the question I would say ask to the theory that I subscribe to, which Stephen is still upholding, and I feel it's worth exploring, about staying to the originality of being an African. I would say that if we take a look at that originality, we talk about how pragmatic is it in the diaspora. And then you look at what led to this dilution, which is what you call imposition or enforced colonialism and other forms. But when we move to the diaspora, we can say we are not forced because it's economic factors, political factors, and others that has moved us to the diaspora. But the Africanness is what people are even asking for. What is that? How does it cut across? And that is still what we want to stay take a grasp or take a look at during this series. So thank you very much. Before I talk too much, Irene.
Thank you, Augustine. Thank you. Yeah. We should actually give you a slot on radio sometime. Brother Shabazz? Brother Shabazz?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick question for our brother. I was wondering what he thought about there are some Igbos who are still pushing for independence in the Biafra movement, and how that complicates or does it undermine this question of Ubuntu. Could they have a separate country and would that still fit into the Ubuntu model, or would it be something else?
Brother Shabazz, I guess the question is for me, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Correct. Yes.
Well, yeah.
Just a quick one.
Okay.
Yeah, we just make it quick.
Okay. How do I make this quick now? So yeah, the whole secession argument and fight comes from the fact that very fabric of Ubuntu has been broken, and people are reacting. The desire to have a Biafra, to have an Arewa state, to have an Oduduwa state, which is what we are seeing in Nigeria, is just a small example of what is happening across many other African states, simply because that Ubuntu fabric is broken. And until we are able to find out how to restructure these things to the way it used to be and the way it worked, either as federating states or federating units, or as what we had as our own native tribes, that injustice will continue to happen. And of course, the Igbo tribe, for instance, are quite it's sensible to want to succeed when you feel you're being marginalized. So it's okay. I understand with them, and I understand with everybody who wants to pull out of a unitary state that is not working. Sincerely, Nigeria is not working for everybody, but it all boils down to the fact that fabric has been broken, and so a particular sect feel they have the right to dominate over every other person, and that's what's causing all of the fight. Just in a brief way to answer you, but we could take this up personally if you want us to.
Yeah, you can share your emails via personal messaging here. Thank you. Is someone take it? Benjamin?
It's me. As a way of, I think we're rounding up now. Just very quick comments before we tune off, but you will be the one to sign us all out anyway. So,
yes.
But just we have had a mouthful. I suppose we are all chewing something now, really, from all that we have talked about this evening, and then even the last issue about Ubuntu and the Igbo secession and all that, which anyway I think would continue on. The question of Ubuntu would continue on even if you have a new Biafran state tomorrow. The question of Ubuntu remains. So anyway, all of that are issues for us to chew and regurgitate and chew again like ruminants. We are not ruminant animals here anyway, but these are all things we have to keep talking about. And we are particularly happy that today's discussion is finishing on the note of what looks like a real debate between embracing hybridity and maintaining, identifying what is particularly African and building upon it, consolidating upon it, so as to ensure that that African essence that is distinct to us would remain intact. I personally don't know how that is easy, because I suppose that even Europe itself today is a makeup of several cultures, several elements from as many backgrounds as possible. touching upon language, touching upon what is eaten as food, touching upon what is worn as clothes, and all of that. So the discussion continues, really, and we are really very thankful that we are already scratching the grounds to create a foundation for a robust discourse on global African identity and consciousness, the intersectional approach. We hope as the series continues that we are able to make better sense of this whole discourse and all of that. Thank you very much to Dr. Olivia. I'd like to call that a name again. Let me look for it very quickly.
Can I just correct everyone? It's not Olivia, it's Oliver.
Okay, Dr. Oliver.
Oliver, not Olivia.
And Dr. Stephen Kator, thank you very much. And for all the participants, all of you, we are thankful. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Benjamin. Hey, this is very interesting. This discussion is very interesting, and I can see that Lisby and Augustine don't want to get it done. Am I still online?
You're still online. We can hear you. I can hear you.
Oh, okay, thank you. I can see a lot of discussion is still going on, and many of us, I think most of us in this discussion, we are really pretty much confused about the African identity, as we can see. And I saw that Brother Shabazz asked, why do Indians, I'm sorry, why do Dr. Olivia and Lisby in Kenya and Tanzania don't like to call Indians Indians, or why they don't like to be called Indians? It's quite amazing on my side and confusing, because for us here in Southern Africa, they actually prefer to be called Indians rather than being called the coolies. Apparently the word coolies, which in Sesotho we translate it to Magula, it's a discriminating word. So for me to hear that in Tanzania and Kenya, they really don't prefer to be called Indians, it's becoming something else. But yeah, like Augustine and others, as they are commenting here on the chats, I can see that most of us, we are really confused about Africanism. And as Augustine mentioned, that Africanness is still what we are searching for. From now on, from this discussion, I just learned that being an African is really, or let me just say, Africanism is really complex. Like, to be an African, it's really complex. I wish we could extend this discussion or set another date to discuss this, to discuss all our opinions about the African identity. But we'll have another webinar on the 21st of May, where we are discussing who is an African. So now I'm getting into the section where I'm giving you the announcements. Our next webinar is on the 9th of April, next month, on the 9th of April, same time, 5 p.m. GMT. So the topic is Africans, LGBTIQ, and stereotypes. And we have amazing speakers there. We have 4 speakers, Dr. Jonathan. Okay, yes, thank you for sharing the screen. We have Dr. Jonathan, we have Renee, we have Dr. Anima and Shaka. Then the next webinar will be on the 21st of May, where we have 5 speakers, including myself, when we will be discussing who is an African. And I don't know how I'm going to structure. I think I should be honest with everyone who is present in this meeting. I don't know how I'm going to structure my presentation after this discussion, after this tonight's discussion. But either way, we will get to that on the 21st of May. Thank you everyone for attending our meeting. And I wish you all well. Let's continue studying. Let's fight for our Africanism, and let's appreciate and love who we are as Africans. Thank you. Good night, everyone. That's if it's night in your area, but I guess it is night for everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Right, night over here. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of the night.
Bye.
Bye-bye. How do I exit? Oh my God.
Irene, good job.
Thank you.
And Benjamin. And I think Mukile is Mukile still here?
Oh, good afternoon in USA for Brother Shabazz. Good afternoon.
Yeah, I think Brother Shabazz is just meeting Irene for the first time. I was telling, I think, oh, we should stop recording because the event is over.